Lauren. Recording in progress.
Good afternoon. This is the Wednesday afternoon, February 16th, 2022 session of the Portland City Council. Keelan, good afternoon. Please call the roll.
Good afternoon. Rubio.
Here.
Ryan. Hardesty.
Here.
Maps.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here, under Portland City Code and state law, the City Council is holding this meeting electronically. All members of the council are attending remotely by video and teleconference, and the city's made several avenues available to the public to listen to the audio broadcast of this meeting. The meeting is available to the public on the city's YouTube channel, eGovPDX, www.portlandoregon.gov/video, and of course, channel 30. The public may always provide written testimony to the council clerk at cctestimony@portlandoregon.gov. The council is taking these steps as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to limit in-person contact and to promote physical distancing. Pandemic is an emergency that threatens the public health, safety, and welfare, which requires us to meet remotely by electronic communications. Thank you all for your patience, your flexibility, and your understanding as we manage through these challenging circumstances to conduct the city's business. And with that, we'll hear from our very able legal counsel on the rules of order and decorum. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the council. What was that?
Oh, I was just saying it's Lauren today. Good afternoon.
Hi, it's land use day. Lindley in the morning, me in the afternoon. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions, reports of first readings of ordinances. The published council agenda at www.portland.gov/council/agenda contains information about how and when you may sign up for testimony while the city council is holding electronic meetings. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you're a lobbyist. If you're representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When your time is up, the presiding officer will ask you to conclude. Disruptive conduct, such as shouting, refusing to conclude your testimony when your time is up, or interrupting others or council deliberations will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being placed on hold or ejected for the remainder of the electronic meeting. Please be aware that all council meetings are recorded.
Thank you very much. We have one item this afternoon, item 114.
Adopt the Environmental Overlay Zone Map Correction Project, amend Title 33, Zoning Maps, Natural Resource Inventory, and supersede and replace noted watershed conservation and protection plans.
I'd like to expand my comments about public testimony just a little bit that I gave earlier. Since this is a land use issue, the public can read and submit written testimony about the proposal by visiting the MAP app at www.portlandmaps.com www.portlandmaps.com/bps/testify/number/easy-ones. That is the most challenging email URL I think I've ever seen, but if you go to www.portlandmaps, you will find a link that will get you to this proposal. And as I said, members of the public can also provide written testimony by emailing the council clerk at cctestimony@portlandoregon.gov. So today, colleagues, we're holding a hearing on the Environmental Overlay Zone Map Correction Project. It is often known as the E-Zone Project for short. Before we begin the presentations, I'd like to provide an opportunity for my fellow commissioners to disclose any conflicts of interest. Colleagues, do any of you have any conflicts of interest that you'd like to disclose? I'm seeing a bunch of head shakes. No. This project is being brought to us by the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. So I will at this point invite Commissioner Rubio to give opening remarks. Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm proud to introduce the Environmental Overlay Zone Map Correction Project to City Council today. As we hear from project staff, E-zones are an important tool that Portland uses to protect critical natural resources. Remapping the E-zones using updated technology will make them more accurate than ever before and helping to make Portland more resilient to extreme weather events and the impacts of climate change. To date, E-zone project staff have conducted more than 600 site visits to confirm and correct data in the natural resource inventory. This is an unprecedented level of fieldwork for a natural resource protection plan in the city of Portland. And they will continue to offer site visits in the coming weeks to ensure that the natural resource data is as accurate as possible. And I'm eager to hear public testimony on the code proposals. But first, I'd like to thank staff from the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and especially project manager Daniel Sobing for an impressive amount of work and public outreach. I'd also like to thank the Planning and Sustainability Commission for holding hearings and making amendments to this proposal prior to making their unanimous recommendation to us. I'd also like to thank the Bureau of Environmental Services for assisting the site visits and projects by providing support, and for also supplying expertise in mapping wetlands and other natural resources. And finally, I want to appreciate all those who've already submitted written testimony and those who will testify today. I'm eager to hear their thoughts, as we all are, my colleagues and I, on how they think this proposal might be strengthened. So I will now turn it over to Eric Engstrom and Daniel Sobing from the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability to provide a presentation on the project.
Thank you, Commissioner and Mayor Wheeler. Good afternoon. My name is Eric Engstrom. I'm a principal planner with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. As the Commissioner mentioned, E-zones are a natural resource protection program that is part of statewide Planning Goal 5. They protect streams, wetlands, and forests. The project we're presenting today is ultimately about making our zoning maps more accurate. The environmental zone maps were developed through several dozen different projects over a 30-year period. And over that time, our mapping technology has improved quite a bit. As an aside, I'll just say that one of my first jobs at the city when I was in my 20s was making zoning maps. And at that time, we used sticky tape and paper. So I'm saying this just to highlight that, to give you a clear sense of how things have changed over the life of this particular program. The primary takeaway I want to leave you with today is this is about map accuracy. We're doing this now because many people have asked us to update these maps for a long time. Our adopted and state acknowledged comprehensive plan included an updated natural resource inventory based on that improved technology, and it's important that we make our zoning maps reflect that better information. There's also a relationship to our work here to implement the remaining parts of the state's middle housing mandate. In short, the state requires we use the latest maps in identifying where middle housing can be allowed or not, and this is one of the ingredients in that mapping process as well. So there's a little connection to the next project we will bring you. Again, the primary takeaway being map accuracy that I want to highlight. At this point, I'll turn it over to Daniel to give you more information about the program. And I also just want to echo all the thanks that the commissioner gave and second all those. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, commissioners. Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Sobing. And I'm not sharing my screen yet. Now I'm sharing my screen. Sorry about that. Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Sobing. I'm with the Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and I'm here to talk to you today about the Environmental Overlay Zone Map Correction Project. Environmental overlays are part of Portland's zoning code, and they protect important natural resources. The conservation zone is typically applied to forest vegetation, and within the conservation zone, some new private development is allowed that is sensitive to the natural resources. The protection zone is a more stringent environmental overlay. It applies to our most critical resources like streams and wetlands. And within the protection zone, new development is generally prohibited except under certain circumstances. The reason that we're doing this project is that State Land Use Planning Goal 5 requires Portland and other cities in Oregon to inventory natural resources and to create a plan to protect the most important natural resources. Metro also has policies that require jurisdictions to protect natural resources, and the adopted comprehensive plan directs Portland to update the E-zones. I think that there's a general perception that E-zones are all about protecting habitat for threatened species and for preserving nature parks. And yes, they do that, and that is important. But that's not the most important reason for why we have E-zones. Natural resources provide critical infrastructure. Vegetation absorbs rainfall and it prevents erosion and landslides. Trees literally hold steep hillsides in place. Streams and wetlands help to retain and convey stormwater, and they prevent downstream flooding. By preventing negative outcomes like flooding and landslides, resources help to make Portland more resilient to the effects of climate change, which are expected to include elevated peak summer temperatures and more intense rainfall events. And we know that development is going to happen in Portland. The population will continue to grow and people are going to continue to build new houses and to divide lots. And if we don't protect the resources that we have from this coming development, we will lose these resources and the ecosystem services that they provide. Losing these resources would have negative consequences for the city. And if we lose them, we will have to make big investments in concrete and steel infrastructure and spend lots of money to replace the functions of those lost resources. Portland has had E-zones for a long time, starting in 1989 and up until 2003. 13 different area-specific natural resource protection plans were adopted to protect resources in different parts of the city. Each of these plans say which resources are intended to be protected, and we're not trying to change that intent. We're only trying to correct the E-zones to match the existing adopted policy. In 2012, Portland adopted the Natural Resource Inventory. The NRI employed new technology to map streams, forests, and wetlands. And what we found when we compared the adopted NRI to the existing E-zones is that a lot of the resources that were supposed to be protected were missed when the E-zones were originally applied. This slide that you see here shows an example of a stream system that's in Southwest Portland, and this stream system is only partially protected. The intention was to apply a protection zone to the streams and to apply a conservation area to the forest around the streams. But the protection zone was only applied to the central stream channel because the tributaries weren't mapped very well, and the overlays totally missed one of the tributaries, which is jutting out to the side and has no environmental overlays around it at all. This is the type of situation that the E-zone project is intended to fix. And there are also areas where E-zones are mapped in places that they shouldn't be, and we're trying to fix that as well. So the scope of this project is pretty narrow. The primary output of the project are amendments to the official zoning maps to correct the E-zone boundaries, and there are some code clarifications and there are some minor zoning code amendments. What's not part of this project are policy changes. We're not intending to change what should or shouldn't be protected. We're only trying to correct the E-zones to align with the mapped natural resources. This map shows you the project area. All of the colored areas are places where the E-zones are being remapped. And I've circled some areas here that show you industrial areas in the Columbia Corridor and along St. Helens. These are areas where we do have conservation and protection zones, but we are not remapping the E-zones in those circled areas in this project. And we hope to have a follow-on project that will start shortly after this project that will update the E-zones in those areas, which will be concurrent with the economic opportunity analysis. In the past, resource protection plans generally applied protection zones to streams and wetlands, but they weren't always consistent. Sometimes part of the stream would be in a protection zone and another part of the stream would be in a conservation zone. And some of these old plans didn't mention wetlands at all. The E-zone project isn't intended to make new policy, but the proposal to apply a minimum protection zone to all streams and wetlands is a change. We have better technology that allows us to map streams and wetlands with much greater accuracy and with more certainty than we did before. And this allows us to apply protection zones to these features more consistently than we did in the past. When the Planning and Sustainability Commission was reviewing this project, they voted to amend our proposals to apply a minimum of 25 feet of protection zone to all streams and wetlands. So I'm going to tell you a story now about why we have natural resources where we do in the city of Portland. And the story starts with slopes. So if you think back about 100 years in the history of Portland, people cleared basically all of the forest and all of the vegetation throughout the entire city. The intention at that time was to develop everything that is now the city of Portland. But what people found when they removed all the natural resources was that the areas that were steeply sloped were highly susceptible to landslides and erosion. So you can see the colors on this map. The dark red are areas where the slopes are 25% or greater. And those are areas that, that all the resources were removed, but development generally didn't occur in those areas. And this is a map of the vegetation mapping that we have today. So if you, as I said, there was at one point, all the forests were completely cleared. Now we have forest in a lot of these steeply sloped areas, and we also have some woodlands in those areas as well. Those are also places where the streams were allowed to remain as surface streams and they weren't piped and buried as they were in the rest of the city. So this is all second growth forest for the most part. And the second growth forest that we have around the city of Portland is providing important ecosystem services. This is a map of the heat island effect in the city of Portland. The blue areas are relatively cool compared to the rest of the city. The red areas are relatively warm compared to the rest of the city. And you can see these cool areas are located in close alignment with places where forest and woodland vegetation is located. So these resources that we have significant impacts on the lives of people that are living in the city of Portland. They're doing really important things for us. This is a complicated slide here, and I'm going to try to unpack it for you. This was a vulnerability analysis, a economic displacement analysis that we did, and this is something that we do with all the projects that we do in the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability to try to determine what the impacts of zoning changes will be on vulnerable populations. And so there's a lot going on here. The top layer is our E-zones. So we have the existing and the proposed E-zones overlaid on top of census data. The census data is a 4-factor analysis. It looks at renter status, income status, educational attainment, and populations of color. And any census tract that's scored high on those 4 factors is colored in dark blue. The areas that are relatively less diverse and wealthier and have higher educational outcomes are the lighter colors on this map. So what is this trying to tell you? It's trying to show that the E-zones, there's not a lot of intersection between existing or proposed E-zones and areas where we know vulnerable populations are located in the city of Portland. And that means 2 things. One, it means that there's not a significant risk of displacement of vulnerable populations from this project. The E-zones, as they're being remapped, are not likely to have impacts on properties that are owned or rented by members of vulnerable populations. The flip side of that, though, is that a lot of these vulnerable populations are not living in close proximity or benefiting from being near natural resources. This is a problem. This is something that is pretty well known in the city of Portland. East Portland doesn't have a lot of trees. It doesn't have a lot of natural resources, and it's a hotter area than the rest of the city. We need to fix that. We need to grow more trees in East Portland. We need to add more natural resources there. It's something that we have programs in the city of Portland that are working on, but it's not something that we can directly address through the E-zone project. That is because the way the E-zone project works, it protects the existing resources that we have right now, and it's not a tool that we can use to expand resources into places that they don't already exist. So I want to get into the details of what the E-zones actually do on individual sites. This is an example of the type of site that you find in Portland where E-zones are mapped. It's a residential site. On this example, the E-zone is represented by this dotted black line that's running through the house and it's running through the existing developed yard. This is not at all unusual because in the history of Portland, we used to build houses pretty close to streams in places that we probably wouldn't allow it today. But that's okay. The E-zones don't really have any impact on existing development. So even though this E-zone's running through the yard and through the house, there are exemptions for all existing development. That means that the house is fully vested within its footprint, and if a disaster was to befall this house and the owners wanted to rebuild it, they could do so within that existing footprint without any restrictions from the E-zones at all. There are also exemptions for the yard and for all the structures in the yard. So if the owners of the house want to keep mowing their lawn, no restrictions on that. If they want to resod, replant, no problem. If they want to turn that yard into a garden, if they want to turn their garden into a landscaped area, there's nothing that would restrict them from doing that in the E-zone code. This is all existing development and it's all exempt. However, expansion of development footprint into the E-zones or removal of native vegetation with the E-zones is limited or restricted under some circumstances. So it's really only impacting new development. Overall, the change in the amount of area that's covered by E-zones is pretty small. It's only, there's an increase of about 2 or 3% in the overall E-zone coverage, which is fairly minor. But The E-zones are shifting around quite a bit, and they are having significant impacts on individual lots. And so we wanted to look at what are the impacts on lots around the city of Portland. So there are lots on which E-zones are already mapped, and there's an increase in E-zone coverage. There are over 7,000 lots that fit that definition. There are also lots that have E-zones on which the E-zones are shrinking, and there are almost 5,000 lots that fit that definition. There are some lots that currently have absolutely no E-zones, and they would have E-zones if our project proposals are adopted, and there are 3,000 plus of those lots. And there are also almost 1,000 lots that currently have E-zones that would have no E-zones at all if our proposals are adopted. These changes are highly site specific, and just looking at the number of lots doesn't really tell you a lot of detail about what the impacts and the changes look like. On many of these lots, the changes are fairly insignificant or small, just a few square feet here or there. On other lots, the changes could be very significant. It could be a matter of acres of new E-zone on some lots. So you really need to dig into what site you're talking about to say what the impact actually looks like. This project has been ongoing for 3.5 years now. And a lot of what we've done with this project has been public outreach. Project staff have conducted over 600 site visits on sites in the field to verify and confirm our natural resource mapping. We've worked with the Bureau of Environmental Services to do wetland mapping on private sites. We're still offering site visits today, so if there's any additional corrections that need to be made, we have a few more weeks to make sure our data is as accurate as possible. We've done a whole bunch of mailings to all affected property owners. We've done mailings to renters and lessees of properties that have E-zones. We've attended over 36 community meetings, neighborhood associations, homeowners associations, other community groups. We hosted drop-in hours where property owners could talk with staff one-on-one about their sites. We held open house meetings, and we had a hearings process with the Planning and Sustainability Commission. That process consisted of 3 public hearings over a 14-month period starting in July of 2020. PSC wrapped up their hearings in September of 2021. During the hearings at the PSC, we received 388 pieces of testimony, verbal and written. Initially, during the PSC process, the majority of the testimony that we received was site specific. People had questions or concerns about the E-zones that were mapped on their sites. Project staff offered site visits throughout the PSC hearing process to go out there and verify natural resource mapping. The number of site specific testimony that we received later in the hearings process, which was much smaller. And we hope that that is a reflection of the fact that we were able to address the concerns of many of the people that were raised at that hearing, at those hearings. So we have 48 people that are signed up to testify today, and reviewing some of the written testimony that's been submitted, and from the testimony that we received at PSC, these are some of the themes that we can expect to hear about during the testimony today. We're going to hear from people that are going to request stronger protections from natural resources. We're going to hear from people that wish to expand the protection zones around features like streams and wetlands. You're going to hear people raise concerns about whether E-zones are going to prevent future expansion of development on their lots or prevent land division. People may raise concerns about difficulties imposed by E-zones on property value, or whether E-zones will make it difficult to sell property. You may hear concerns raised by some about whether E-zones will impact the housing supply in the city of Portland. Some may testify about risk of wildfire and whether E-zones will prevent people from protecting their homes from wildfire. And you will also hear from people who will talk about how natural resources protect us from natural disasters and make us resilient to the impact of climate change. And happy to stick around and address any of these concerns if commissioners wish to discuss them once the testimony is concluded today, or in a follow-up memo later on. So some take-home messages from this presentation.
Daniel, could I just jump in here since
yes,
you left the opening?
Yeah.
First of all, I really appreciate this presentation, and I appreciate you laying out some of the potential themes that we will hear in testimony, and I assume we'll hear other themes as well. And I won't speak for everybody, but for my part, I would absolutely like to hear Not today, but I would like to hear a brief response to each of these potential concerns, either through a memo or through a direct meeting. I think you've done a good job of outlining what we're hearing, and I think it would be useful to hear staff's response to some of these issues. And I appreciate you offering it. Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you for requesting that. We will certainly follow up on every piece of testimony that we hear today as fully as we can. Some take-home messages. The E-zones are intended to protect streams, forests, and wetlands, and we are remapping them using the best available technology that we have. E-zones are a natural resource protection program that's required by State Planning Goal 5. So far, project staff have conducted 3.5 years of public outreach, which includes over 600 site visits. Existing development is fully exempt from E-zone regulations, but newer expanded development is allowed within certain limits. We have a project report that's available on our website. And if you want to look at individual sites and see what the existing and proposed E-zones look like on those sites, we have a map app posted online where you can review the E-zones on individual sites. And a note on project timeliness. Why now? Why remap E-zones today? We should move forward with the E-zone project because using the best available technology to remap E-zones is the right thing to do. It's an example of good governance. The comprehensive plan has directives that instruct us to update the natural resource or the E-zones. We have a large constituency of Portland residents who have been requesting that we update the E-zone mapping for over a decade now. And the second phase of the residential infill plan is relying on this project for some of their mapping work. So adopting the E-zone project will help to advance the work of that project. And some notes on the process for moving forward here. The written record is posted on the E-zone project website, and it can be found at portland.gov/bps/E-zone/PSC summary. Additionally, all written testimony that's been submitted can be accessed and reviewed by members of the public on the E-zone map app. And testimony can be found at portlandmaps.com/bps/testimony. The E-zone project staff will continue to offer site visits to confirm natural resource mapping. The deadline to submit a request is a week from today, February 23rd, 2022 at 5 p.m. All site visits requested by that date will be completed before March 16th, 2022. And staff have committed to follow up with all property owners who request a site visit by email or phone. And staff will work with people that request site visits to find a mutually acceptable time to review the mapping of the natural resources and the draft E-zones on their property. Site visits can be requested by contacting staff at ezone@portlandoregon.gov, or you can leave a voicemail at 503-823-4225. And that is the end of my presentation. Eric Engstrom and I will be available to answer questions at the conclusion of the public testimony. I would like to turn it back to Commissioner Rubio to introduce the Planning and Sustainability Commissioner, Gabe Shuships.
Thank you, Eric and Daniel, for that presentation. And as Daniel mentioned, next I'd like to introduce Gabe Shuships, a member of the Planning and Sustainability Commission, who will present the PSC's recommendation.
Thank you, Commissioner Rubio. Good afternoon, City Council. Before I start, I want to thank city staff, Daniel, Eric, and others who have diligently done this work to correct decades of mistakes. My name is Gabe Shuships. I'm here as a representative from the Planning and Sustainability Commission to present a recommendation today. Daniel just gave this great overview. A few key points that I want to share. On September 28th, 2021, the PSC voted unanimously to recommend the E-zone project to City Council. This came after a 14-month hearing process that started in July of 2020. We, the PSC, held 11 meetings on the E-zone project, including 3 public hearings where we heard testimony. While considering the E-zone project, the PSC voted to amend the E-zone project in several ways. This includes amendments that would allow for the following activities: the replacement of failing septic systems, the creation of fire breaks, and the application of ADA recommendations to trail width standards. Some of the most important amendments that the PSC voted on were minimum protections for stream and wetlands. The PSC voted to apply at least 25 feet of protection zones and 25 feet of conservation zones to all streams and all wetlands. And an important note is this is a fairly conservative measure compared with other state and federal recommendations of 50 to 150 feet of stream buffer protection. So this is a conservative move in the right direction. I'd say most importantly, I am a citizen of the Confederate Tribes of the Umatilla. And before the city of Portland was known as Portland, this was indigenous lands that were made up of first food resources that were in forms of native plants, fish, and game. So this was always an area that was known as an ecologically sustainable landscape. The city now supports at least 40,000 indigenous peoples who have a strong need and desire to be able to access first foods and cultural resources within city limits. The E-Zone project will help to stabilize and protect what is yet to be lost. Natural resources are vital elements that are woven through the fabric of the city of Portland. They help to contribute to the livability of the city, and they protect people from hazards and the effects of climate change and wildfire. It is extremely important that the City Council votes to adopt the E-Zone project to modernize our natural resource protection program and really to continue the strong legacy of environmental protection that Portland is known for and that has really preceded, being known as the City of Portland. So thank you for your time.
Very good. Thank you. Gabe, we appreciate your work on this as well. We know you don't get paid the big bucks for the work you do, but we're so appreciative because this is very complicated, and I appreciate your being here today. I assume, Commissioner Rubio, that completes the formal presentation?
Yes, that does, Mayor.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all. I appreciate how much work has gone into this proposal for the council's consideration. Colleagues, do any of you have any questions for the staff or our PSC Commissioner Shoshups before we take public testimony? Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not going to ask any questions until after public testimony, but I just wanted to appreciate Daniel, Gabe, and all the staff. I'm just amazed at how much work it takes for us to actually develop good land use policy and how important it is for staff to check all the boxes and cross all the T's and dot all the I's. Eric, you've been doing this for a long time. I almost fell out of my chair. You said you started making maps when you were 20. I just wanted to not lose the opportunity to just thank all of you so much. I know the dedication that you put into this work, and I'm very grateful. I can't wait to hear what the public feedback is, but I just didn't want to leave today without saying thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Keelan, how many people do we have signed up for public testimony?
We have 49 people signed up, but not everyone has arrived yet.
That's what I figure. People farther down the list probably won't show up for a while yet. So we will now move on to public testimony. Each person will have 2 minutes to testify. As you just heard, we have a lot of people who are signed up. We're eager to hear from each and every one of you. I will ask that if you've already heard your points by being made by another testifier, you don't have to reiterate it chapter and verse. You can just say, I agree with what John or what Sally said earlier. Also, if you're part of a group testifying and advocating together, we'd appreciate you keeping your points as short and to the point as possible, just so we can get through this long list of people who want to testify today. Please be aware that after 2 minutes, Keelan, our very outstanding council clerk, has been instructed to mute you. So it is important that you watch the clock that will be made available and that you wrap up your comments prior to 2 minutes. And with that, Keelan, I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. I will call people 3 at a time. First up, we have Susan Torch, Jeannie Friedman, and Joseph Angel. Go ahead, Susan. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm Susan Torch, and I reside at 4715 Southwest Hewitt Boulevard. I appreciate the presentation by the Bureau staff, but I think that they operate in a world of regulation speak. And we, the property owners on the ground, are trying to desperately navigate and abide by these very complex new regulations that are being imposed on us. I don't understand it all myself, despite having spent quite a bit of time researching it, but I have been able to hire experts to try to help me understand what this means for my property. And the upshot of it is that we have a large property. We had always had plans to put in ADUs and such for aging parents and college students who always seek to return to the nest. And just to put in one ADU is going to cost $36,000 of a surveyor's time, because the lines that have been drawn on our property, which now cover almost 90% of our property, including part of our home and driveway, it's hard to navigate that. So I understand the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability has done a great job in putting together these new expanded maps, but I would argue that they are illogical and overly broad and too restrictive, and placing unfair burdens on property owners. And the reality is that there's concept and theory, which sounds great. We are all environmentalists here, and we all want to protect important watershed areas, but not at the cost of unfairly putting arbitrary, unreasonable, impossible to understand demands on our property owners, who are really just trying to do the right thing and trying to be good stewards of our property. Thank you.
Next up, we have Jeannie Friedman. Jeannie, are you there?
How to unmute it? I was just going to say I don't have any questions, but they're going to just pass me. How do I unmute it?
Jeannie, you're unmuted. We can hear you.
Oh, good. I don't have any questions. Thank you, though.
Did you want to testify, or are you good? I guess she's good. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Next up, we have Joseph Angel.
Mayor and Commissioners, thank you very much. I want to first thank Daniel and Mindy and for tromping around my property and almost getting lost. But we found all the things we needed to find. So it was very much appreciated that we had staff from the city that were that interactive about what was going on. What I'd like to testify about today is not the maps. I think the maps turned out fine. The issue I want to talk about is this issue about septic up on Skyline. For years and years, we've been up on Skyline with this problem. We are in a septic area system because there are no sewers. Because of the rural reserve, there will not be sewers for 50 years. So our only alternative is septic systems. The plan that has been put forth about existing septic replacement, I think is good. It's a good way to do it. What it does is it simplifies the process. It allows people to come in and do it in a more efficient and orderly fashion because they are satisfying the certain standards the city has set down under this new process. What is missing is that should be the same for somebody coming in for a new system. The systems are exactly the same. When you have a failed system, it doesn't get fixed. You move over and you build a whole new system. So protecting the E-zone for a new system, for a new homeowner, or protecting it for an existing homeowner, are exactly the same. They should apply to both. Thank you for your time.
Next up, we have Bob Salinger, Dominic Corrado, and Linda Bauer.
Good afternoon, Mayor Willer and members of Portland City Council. My name is Bob Salinger. I'm the Conservation Director for Portland Audubon Society. I'm here today to express our strong support for adoption of the city's E-zone map updates. We greatly appreciate the work of city staff and of the Planning Commission moving this forward. It is long overdue. Our E-zones are absolutely critical to protecting natural resources, to protecting the public from natural hazards, and for mitigating the effects of climate change. They provide the regulatory backbone to protect critical natural resources like streams, wetlands, forests, steep slopes, and wildlife habitat within the city. This is really the foundation off which we build a healthy environment. And many of those maps are long out of date. I think it's really important to reemphasize the fact that this is a map update and a map correction process. It is not a change in policy. It's simply taking the policies that we've had in place that have gone through extensive vetting and making sure that they are accurately applied. That's really a matter of common sense. We don't want to apply regulations where they're not appropriate, and we want to apply them where they are. And the city's done an outstanding job updating the maps to make sure that they are accurate. I would note again that there were 11 hearings before the Planning Commission, 11 meetings and work sessions, and over 800 site visits, 600 by BPS, but an additional 200 by BES. So this has gone through incredible amounts of vetting. I want to call out to the fact that parts of the city were not done, the North Reach and the Columbia Slough, and that's because we have not yet updated the EOA. And I want to flag that because a lot of our natural resource programs, this one, the floodplain program, trees, and so on, are not being addressed in these areas because we have an out-of-date EOA, and that keeps getting postponed. So we really need to advance that as well and make sure that we can do these things holistically. So in conclusion, we strongly support this moving forward. We think it really is simply a matter of making sure that our maps.
Next up, we have Dominic Corrado. Dominic, you're muted.
Am I live now?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Dominic Corrado, 6917 Southwest 49th Avenue in Portland. I object to both the premise and the process of this map correction project. The premise is that it's a correction, but that's a subterfuge. Brand new wetland overlays are being proposed where none were originally mapped. They propose to do this with purportedly new and improved aerial surveys that, in my experience, have proven through wetland delineations to be flawed. The imposition of new wetland restrictions should be addressed as an entirely separate process, separate from the map correction process. I own 4 parcels in Southwest Portland that are affected by this process. All of them either contained proposed new wetland designations or were close enough to be affected by a wetland boundary. The parcel to the west of me was also covered by a new wetland designation. We objected in order to wetlands delineation that proved no wetlands existed on any of those parcels. A 100% failure rate of the aerial maps that are on those 4 properties that are now being relied on to encumber numerous properties with new E-zones. And I'm sure that those property owners don't even know they are affected. Designation as a wetland is a devastating event for property owners. If owners want to build an addition or do repairs, it could create a serious obstacle. And it's not just a problem for the property owner. Adjacent property owners within a certain distance of a wetland boundary are also affected. An incorrectly mapped wetland designation is just as devastating as a true wetland. The only way to correct it is through a delineation that can only be conducted during the rainy season. When I pointed this out to staff, I was told that even though we are disproportionately affected, we're not being treated any differently than anybody else in an E-zone. Notice how neatly they have carved out a new class of citizens with diminished constitutional rights. We now have a citizen review committee in Portland created because of the repeated violations of citizens' rights by the police bureau. If we expect police to understand and respect constitutional citizen rights, shouldn't we be able to expect the same accountability?
Next up, we have Linda Bauer.
Good afternoon. I have two requests of you today. First one, please do not add additional E-zones to our property. After the public stormwater runoff, which has been diverted onto our property, the stormwater will no longer pool on our property, and then the E-zone criteria will not be met. Request 2, please direct the appropriate bureau to send the public stormwater runoff from Southeast Foster Road to the existing BES public stormwater facility. Here's what happened. The city of Portland issued a building permit for a new house on an adjacent lot to ours. In order to build that house, the existing drainage way on that property had to be blocked. When the drainage way was blocked, the public stormwater runoff from Southeast Foster Road was diverted onto our private property without our permission. I want to be clear, we did not and do not consent to public stormwater runoff being diverted onto our private property. Our property does not meet the code requirements for a public or a private stormwater facility, especially when there is an existing BES public stormwater facility approximately 75 feet from our property. The BES facility is 32,234 feet or 3/4 of an acre large. Please do not add E-zones, and please direct the appropriate bureau to handle the public stormwater. Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have Joseph Schaefer, James Housley, and Chris Robish.
Good afternoon. I'm Joseph Schaefer, a land use planner at Jordan Ramus, here with attorney Jamie Housley, who will speak next. We have many clients whose names and addresses are in the record and won't be repeated here. You are hearing much today about what areas are and are not within the environmental zones. Please recognize that these regulations affect all properties that include any E-zones on any portion of the property, including the 3,280 properties with E-zones on them for the first time. This includes the obligations to hire consultants to identify and survey the E-zone boundary and to dedicate the E-zone area as a conservation tract whenever development occurs, even when the proposed development is far away from any environmental zone. The consultant costs for compliance run into the tens of thousands of dollars, even when no housing is proposed within the environmental zones. In our view, these are unreasonable costs, which discourage the development of housing because the city shifts the burden of mapping the environmental zone boundaries onto each applicant. Mr. Sobing's PowerPoint indicated the proposed maps are consistent with existing policy. Jamie Housley will now explain why they are not consistent with state policies on housing. Thank you.
Mayor, Commissioners, for the record, Jamie Housley, 1016 Southwest Davenport Street, Portland 97201, attorney for several property owners, including those that will be impacted by the proposed regulations. We submitted a letter today that we previewed with Ms. King in the city's attorney's office in draft form a few days ago. Cutting to the quick, there are several state laws that protect housing capacity, and we believe that this proposal conflicts with those. Oregon's needed housing statute precludes the adoption of regulations that impact housing that are not clear and objective. The proposed E-zone maps are not clear and objective because the city has not clarified whether resources are present where shown on the maps. That is why there's so many last minute changes being made following staff visits. And again, we heard that they're willing to do that again today. Second, the criteria for adoption of E-zones are completely discretionary and only require that the city determine significant natural resources are present. Third, the city puts the burden and cost onto applicants and their consultants to actually locate and map the purported resources on their own properties. Obviously, if the proposed maps were accurate, this would not be necessary. Our letter also raises a number of other legal issues that you can find there. This is a complicated task to balance all of the interests. Washington County, for instance, has been working on their E-zones since 2018 with numerous legal challenges, and they are still not there yet. We hope that the city delays this ordinance and request that staff consider the points raised by our office. And as the city attorney knows, we remain open to a dialogue to find workable solutions. Thank you.
Next up, we have Chris Robish.
Good afternoon, members of the council, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the time allowing us to speak. I want to echo many others, thank Dan and the staff for all the work they've done. The site visit was extremely educational for us. We live in Southwest Portland in the Arnold Creek area. Our property is currently in the conservation and protection zone. There is about 4,000 square feet of a 7,500 square foot lot that is in conservation zone that will not be. So our conservation zone will shrink. We've been in the process of mitigating steep slope drainage and stormwater runoff problems. And we inherited, unbeknownst to us, 20 years of violations on this property. And it turned out we built on top of, or tried to mitigate, environmental problems on top of existing violations. I bring that up as a strong supporter of this project and ask for due pass because 405 and then specifically 33, 430, 405, those edits allow one in our position who inherited the problems or violations can move forward in a non-land use review, far less expensive and expedited process to resolve problems here on the property and remove violation as we are actually helping the environment. So for example, it would cost us roughly 15 to 20K just to fill out an application and get approval to fix things that builders, developers, and previous owners created. So therefore we are in favor of this plan. Finally, the accuracy and the effort for accuracy while maintaining the city's policy for environmental protection, we find in our instance has been top notch, and we support the work that's been done. Thank you.
Next up, we have Tara Mather, John Rabkin, and Tessa Dover.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. Tara Mather is my coworker at OHSU. She unfortunately had an emergency come up today and a little while ago asked if I could step in for her, if that's all right. I'm Director of Local Relations at OHSU. I really just wanted to come and testify today and primarily thank staff. I've watched and participated in a massive number of city endeavors over the last 20 some years. And I don't know that I've ever witnessed just the sheer, I mean, I've witnessed a lot of great public engagement, but the level of public engagement in this project has really been amazing. You know, staff willing to come and meet with us multiple times on site, walking through, helping explain regulations. It's really been kind of an amazing process to participate in. At the beginning, we've had a lot of concerns, as do many people, about wildfires and how devastating wildfires could be in the West Hills, where much of OHSU exists. And through the process, staff has very patiently explained to us kind of what the regulations would do and wouldn't do, and it's really alleviated our concerns. So really just wanted to give a huge thumbs up to the public engagement process that's taken place and support the efforts of the city with this measure. So thank you so much for the time to be here.
Next up, we have John Rapkin.
Mr. Mayor and Commissioners, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I'll try to be very brief, and I'd like to also thank Mr. Sobing and his staff for their willingness to come out for a site visit. I don't want to repeat, as Mayor Willer, you suggest, I don't want to repeat what the prior property owners have already stated. I want to echo particularly what Susan, the original property owner, stated. I'd like to point out that as property owners, and I've been a longstanding property owner in Portland well before the institution of the overlay, the value of my property, unfortunately, has been taken by the process, by the city, because of all the things that you've heard about what it would take to further develop buildable lots that are part of my property. And so my intent to have built on the additional lot is now adversely impacted. I would also like to point out that unfortunately, there's not been any mitigation for the taxes that we all are paying annually for the privilege of owning this property in Portland, which we no longer have the freedom to develop as we had intended. But most importantly, I think that this process is disincentivizing some of us from protecting the property. And I say that because the way this, as it's called, a revision of existing maps is being done is by looking at the tree cover. And so my property is having additional overlay. And had I not protected the tree cover, it wouldn't be included. So now I'd be incentivized to decrease the tree cover so that when this happens again, I won't have additional portions of my property affected by the overlay. So unfortunately, I think if we see that this is going to happen now and it will happen in the future, there needs to be some way to not disincentivize homeowners, property owners from taking down trees. Thank you for your time.
Next up, we have Tessa Dover.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Tessa Dover. I'm a professor at Portland State, and I'm here on behalf of myself and my wife, Dr. Haley Dodderman, who's a local child psychologist. We bought our first home on Southwest Ormondy Way in the West Hills about 2 years ago, and our property is covered entirely by the new proposed C-zone, including the house itself, the paved driveway, the front, back, and side yards, and even the street in front of it. We back up into a wooden gully with beautiful forest views and ample shade, diverse wildlife. We affectionately refer to our home as the tree house, and this forested area behind our house, while still on our property, is already a protected P zone. But much closer to our house, including in our front yard, there are at least 10, 50 to 60 foot big leaf maple trees. And we love these trees, but they are not indigenous to the forest. They were planted around 1980 when our home was built, and they are dying. Shortly after moving into our new house, the top third of one of those maples broke off and fell straight onto our deck, missing our living room and windows by a matter of feet, damaging our deck and our railing. It could have been much worse. Before we moved in, a similar incident led to a several hours long electrical fire as a tree fell on a transformer right outside of our window. As homeowners, we have become diligent about hiring arborists to manage these trees through approved channels. We've been diligent about preventing wildfires and severe damage to property and environment by removing ivy and limbs at risk of falling on power lines or roofs. We aim to be stewards of the lands we are lucky to live on by planting native trees and protecting and leaving the protected zones alone. However, the new proposed zoning map was drawn seemingly without consideration of current residents or the nature of the canopied areas. So under the new laws, it will become almost prohibitively expensive, time-consuming, and bureaucratic to remove dead and dying trees next to our home. Instead of paying several $1,000s, it will become tens of $1,000s with several permits and fees and bureaucracy. We don't want to build a massive development of luxury condos. We want to make reasonable choices about our property, and we don't think the current drawings achieve this.
Next up, we have Douglas Kinnaird, Willie Levinson, and Lynn Chow.
Thank you, Mayor Wheeler, members of the commission, and
the staff of PPS, including Daniel Sobing, who visited our site recently. My name is Doug Kinnaird. I live in Portland, Southwest Portland on Lancaster Road. As the Western United States enters another year of drought conditions, as evidenced by California's longest drought period in 1,200 years, devastating forest fires in Oregon, low snowpack in the Cascades, and frighteningly low water levels in nearby reservoirs, maintaining watersheds is a vital part of water management. Our neighborhood in Southwest Portland is one such critical watershed where 3 small branches of Lady Fern Creek feed into Arnold Creek, which in turn is a tributary of Tryon Creek. This area, according to a survey in 1993, once comprised 22 acres, but a more recent survey shows it has been reduced to fewer than 10 undeveloped acres. Recent completion of the Boones Ferry Road Bridge to allow free flow of Tryon Creek underscores its importance to the area. Therefore, we fully support the Environmental Overlay Zone Map Correction Project as presented. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Willie Levinson.
Good afternoon. I'm Willie Levinson, ringleader of Human Access Project, and I just wanted to express my opinion, my support of Audubon, Portland staff, and the Citizen Advisory Committee, and just want to thank City Hall members for your dedication and commitment to our city. You guys, I know, just put everything in, and I know how hard, well, I have no idea how hard your job is, but I'm grateful that you're sticking in there and fighting for Portland. Thanks again, everybody, for your work.
Next up, we have Lynn Chow.
"34 of us have submitted written testimony. The foundation of the entire project is based upon the accuracy of the computer maps. The maps are 12 to 17 years old and missing data from 2004 to 2022 for riparian areas. Does the eZone Map Correction Project have the slope data needed, the vertical assessment to apply a 3D mapping to 3D land?"
I'll call you later. We've unfortunately got like 50 people signed up for.
What? Can I continue?
Yes, please continue.
Oh, okay. Does the eZone Map Correction Project have the slope data needed, the vertical assessment to apply a 3D mapping to 3D land? Metro Title III is a supplemental plan to add additional protections to streams for steep slopes protecting up to 200 feet based on steepness of slope. By not adopting Metro Title III, the eZone Map Correction Project has reduced the protection of our streams by 100 feet in the West Hills. Is this because the computer model is incomplete and does not have the slope data needed, which Metro Title III needs? If so, the model is incomplete and cannot assess 3D terrain properly. To protect streams, it's important to apply a minimum of 50 feet horizontal P-zones, regardless of how the terrain slopes. The eZone Map Correction Project is applying 50 feet at any angle the terrain slopes. If vertically up, the eZone is protecting 50 feet straight up on steep slopes, which means construction can happen on the slope 50 feet straight up right next to the stream. Is this because the computer model is not able to give a full 50 feet horizontal P-zone because it does not have the slope data? 50 feet in their computer model is 50 feet in any direction. Current adopted policies like Metro Title III is not being applied. Is this because the technology does not have the capabilities? If the computer algorithm is not able to properly assess 3D terrain, do not approve this project until slope data is obtained. Not protecting with greater protection the watershed headwaters and tributary areas will create more inequities to neighborhoods downstream. Protect the best. It's the start of the entire water system of Portland. It's where the coolest.
Next up, we have Cassandra Dixon, Robert George, and John Gibbon.
Thank you, Mayor Wheeler and commissioners. Experts tell us that climate change is hydrologic change, and that to be adaptive and resilient, we need to think and act now about the changes that are already percolating through our watersheds. And that's why we are asking you today to consider conferring more robust protection for this little known place in Portland, Cornell Mountain, which is the highest elevation site in the city, one that provides so much support to watershed function and city ecosystem protection. How much water is up here on Cornell Mountain? A lot. As the old saying goes, when the well is dry, we know the worth of the water. At 1,300 feet, the highest elevation in Portland, we have more of everything, more rain, more snow, more ice, more fog. It often snows up here when there's no snow at all on Skyline Boulevard. So think about it. You're down on the Hawthorne Bridge or downtown, and you look up from downtown and you see the mists and the hills. Those old growth trees capture the precipitation, they store it in this mountain, and then it's released downslope in both directions, east and west, feeding the high, unnamed tributaries that provide water to Bulge Creek, the jewel in the crown of Forest Park. The good news is that the north slope of Cornell Mountain is still undeveloped, and there is very little ecologically sensitive land like this that is still intact. Indeed, local nonprofits, including Audubon, Forest Park Conservancy, and the Columbia Land Trust, have all attested to the ecological significance of this location and the importance of protecting it for the greater good. Because Cornell Mountain is the highest elevation place in the city, a place of headwaters and an important wildlife corridor that connects, by the way, Forest Park to Washington Park, Cornell Mountain does strategically support the health of the greater Forest Park ecosystem and the Audubon sanctuaries that sweep up to Skyline Boulevard. So please think of Cornell Mountain like a small but powerful custodian of the city's other parks and sanctuaries that the public uses. We want to honor the work that the staff has done, the map correction staff, Dan and Mindy. This is truly a Herculean task. And we also want to say that knowing the mountain as we...
Next up, we have Robert George. Robert, you're muted.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Robert Torch. I live at 4715 Southwest Hewitt Boulevard. My wife Susan testified earlier. As she stated, the current environmental zone encompasses the northwest corner of our property, approximately 15% of our land. The proposed environmental zoning would wind up covering close to 90% of our property, including our driveway and even a portion of our house. I think that's entirely unreasonable and will make it very difficult to sell our property in the future and will have an immediate and devastatingly negative impact on our property's value. I spend hours each week maintaining our property in an environmentally conscious manner, which primarily involves ridding it of invasive species. We have close to 75 trees on our property. I've never touched anything in the current environmental zone. I'm constantly pulling up ivy, garlic mustard, and lesser calendine, but also pruning trees and working with professional arborists almost on a monthly basis. Being required to apply to BDS for a permit or risk a potential significant fine multiple times a year simply is not feasible either from a property owner's perspective or frankly from the perspective of BDS, which is going to be absolutely swamped with permit requests. I don't think that BPS's zoning recommendations adequately take into account the timing and costs involved for property owners and how difficult it will be for BDS to implement the proposed rules. In addition, for better or worse, most of the trees and landscaping on our property are almost all non-native, and this type of landscaping should not be classified as a protected natural resource. On a separate personal point, we have elderly parents on the East Coast, and we purchased our property with the understanding that under current zoning, we would have the option of potentially building an ADU or two if we needed to move one or both sets of parents out to Portland. We bought the property with the understanding that we could possibly divide the property into 4 or 5 lots. The new E-zone would limit us to possibly squeezing in one additional lot, and even that is uncertain and would require significant expense, already estimated at tens of thousands of dollars. In a similar vein, after reading for the past decade and agreeing with Portland's stated desire to increase urban housing density and the city's acknowledged current acute housing shortage, all of a sudden it appears as though urban density is fine for the east side, but now the city wants to convert certain west side neighborhoods into no development zones.
Hello.
Sorry, next up we have John Gibbon.
Yeah, hello. I'm holding up a newspaper or a magazine article for Daniel's information because he'll understand this. It's entitled "Engineers Are Building Bridges with Recycled Wind Turbine Blades." That's one of the issues that I address in my written testimony that I've submitted both to council and on the MAP app as a member of the Markham Neighborhood Association. It's Transportation and Watershed Chair. One of my concerns about this project is that there are areas in Markham, most of the major streams in Markham have gone from standalone conservation zones where it was reasonable to plan for trails and bridges to cross them, to protected zones where it is going to be much more difficult and much more expensive for people like PBOT and BES to make improvements and the neighborhoods to support those improvements. I also am speaking on behalf of the Quail Park Neighborhood Association, or the Quail Park Homeowners Association, and saying, while Daniel's right that existing homes are not directly impacted by the expansion of the E-zone, the existing zones that depend on in-stream water structures to protect them from water overflow are. If you will look at my written testimony, we have several locations inside Quail Park where we've built rock retaining walls to prevent streams from going in certain directions at the request of the city, I might add, in the 1970s when this project was developed. Those areas will be subject to much more intense regulation.
Next up, we have Scott Simmons.
Yeah, I think that we're all in favor of taking care of our wetlands, protecting our habitat, the trees, the streams. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Back in 1970, my father built a house, his dream house, on this piece of property just off of Patton Road. And he'll be 97 in April, and he's still living there. There's a large ravine that runs along the side and the back of the house that is hidden from the overhead view. But the overhead view that I'm looking at shows the canopy of the trees. Now, those trees have been in this particular ravine, which the borders or the ravine is impossible to build on. There's no expansion that can possibly go in there. And the trees that are in the ravine are over 100 years old. Now, those trees have grown and they've flourished over all these 100 years. And so the canopy of the trees is actually covering half of his garage. And where you guys are zoning or rezoning the boundaries is actually going right through his kitchen. There's actually no possibility that anybody could even build anything or plant anything. And we've gone through extreme expense to reinforce the banks of the ravine so that we don't have any erosion. And I'm just really asking the council that's worked so hard on this, if you guys can give us some additional time so that we can maybe, I can get somebody out to my property and explain to me how this makes sense, because right now where the boundaries are going is taking over 2/3. It's reducing the property by 2/3 and is going to affect the resale value. And I'm not exactly sure who would even want to buy it. So that's kind of what I wanted to say.
Next up, we have Marita Inglesby, Claire Carter, and Craig Keast.
Hello, my name is Marita Inglesby, and I live at 6214 Southwest 41st Avenue. And thank you, Mayor Wheeler and commissioners, for this opportunity to testify. And thank you to the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability for the huge amount of work on this important project. I want to tell a couple stories. In the Hayhurst neighborhood in which I live, we experienced a recent example of how important it is to have accurate maps, which we currently do not have. A couple of years ago, an 11-house subdivision was approved and is now being built in a wetlands area that would have had greater protection if the new maps were in place. Neighbors protested, however, the subdivision was approved. Well, last fall, damaging flooding and erosion occurred, great impact downstream to homeowners, and we really wish that those new maps had been in place. Also, the impact of steep slopes has been experienced in our neighborhood. In 2016, a 7-unit apartment building had to be quickly evacuated. Residents were at a loss to find new housing. I heard several pleas for people to move into basements in the neighborhood or find some place to live. And in 1996, a complete house was demolished by a landslide. So the impacts of not having correct maps and of allowing development in areas where there really shouldn't be development is huge for people who live in our city. The new maps are critical to the city's response to the effects of climate change, to the health and well-being of our community members, and the resilience of our natural areas. Respect for our land is respect for our people. Thank you.
Next up, we have Claire Carter.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, for giving us the opportunity to come before you and testify about this really important effort that the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability has been doing. My name is Claire Carter. I live at 6156 Southwest Nevada Court. I am the current Maplewood Neighborhood Association Chair. Maplewood is in Southwest. I'm testifying in support of the E-zone update, and I would really like to emphasize that this is really an amazing piece of work, and I would encourage adoption of it immediately. While I am the current chair of Maplewood, in my working life, I spent 25 years working for the Oregon Department of Transportation as a natural resource specialist. My responsibilities were identifying wetlands and other water and natural resources for protection. I know in the initial Portland Comprehensive Plan, identification of sensitive natural resources did not meet any technical standards at the federal or state level whatsoever. Since then, the inventory has been updated, as this effort was part of, using ground truthing and other more scientifically validated methods to identify the important boundaries and resources that need to be protected through the E-zone mapping project. This has been an amazing amount of work. I really commend planning and sustainability. And again, what I would like to say is that this project really needs to be implemented immediately and is essential to help the city meet its climate action plan and climate preparation strategies, the criticalness of which the news tells us is more important every single day. Thank you very much. Be well. Have a good day.
Next up, we have Craig Keast.
This is Craig Keast. I'm a registered landscape architect in Portland for almost 40 years. I met with the city on a site regarding several properties. I questioned the proposed correction map. The city responded right away with an edit to the draft map where some trees were erroneously included in a mapped forest area. 4 properties were affected and edits were made. At the same time, I encouraged a friend to look at the map on their property. They were unaware of the map correction plan. They had a site visit from the city resulting in edits on their property, and there were 3 properties affected. So that's a total of 7 properties that have had the city out and they corrected the map that they were presenting to you today. So I believe additional site work needs to be done to verify the accuracy of the draft map. In addition, the existing E-zone maps we've had for many years have long arcs where you can see where the lines are on the plans. The new draft plan map has very, very irregular lines that are more like a coral fingers coming into many properties. The irregularities of the lines will make it very difficult to determine where proposed development can be, and it will cost a homeowner a lot more to figure out where these lines might be. You will see that there's some little eddies, almost like a backwater and things like that on the maps. And I went over all of the maps on the city, and I was just amazed at how complicated the edges of the maps are. I think they need to be simplified. Thank you.
Next up, we have Scott Terrell, Lori Rutenberg, and Gary Schoenberg.
Thank you. My name is Scott Terrell, and I live on 4710 Southwest Hewitt Boulevard. I have additional property that's next door to that, which has a large ravine running through it and running water at this time of year, and actually a little bit most of the year. And on the other side of my house, I have another smaller ravine that has water running part of the time. I'm all for protecting those areas, and I keep a tree canopy. I plant lots of trees. I even used Portland Urban tree sharing program this year where they just brought me 2 trees not too long ago. So I'm all for it. What I do not wish to happen is have such regulation and increased difficulty in obtaining permits to take care of trees. I have a lot of huge trees on my property. They have to be taken care of. They become dangerous. I've paid a lot of money recently to have ivy cut away from the bottom of my trees. And I don't think I see any incentive being provided by the city for people to maintain their properties in a better fashion. That would be more, would help improvement with the environment. So I do not want to see through this process that it becomes more difficult to obtain permission to do certain things on the conservation portions, protected zones. The protection zones, I don't have as much problem with. I do have running water on the property, but there should be provision where it's not made prohibitive by fees, penalties, regulation, prohibitive costs, and having your property reviewed to do certain things. So I just hope that you keep that in mind. And I also looked at the map on Portland Maps about my property, and I did not see that it appeared correct. It did not outline where my property goes in conjunction with Ormondy Street and Hewitt Boulevard. So I'm a little bit concerned about how I would be able to effectuate something to do with my land if the map isn't correct. Thank you.
Next up is Lori Rutenberg. Lori, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Mayor Wheeler, commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm Rabbi Lori Rutenberg. My husband, Rabbi Schoenberg, and I are asking for your help to prevent the E-zone remapping project from making development impossible on our property. We chose to move to our home on Southwest 25th Avenue in 1990 because we saw this home as a perfect site to fulfill our vision for our work, to create a home-based program of outreach to share Jewish home life, and for community building with the larger Portland community. We've welcomed nearly 10,000 people over 32 years of doing this work. We also chose our home, which we bought from a developer, because we had every reason to believe that one day we would be able to develop our property. In 2015, anticipating retirement, we approached BDS and worked with staff from across Portland bureaus to plan an environmentally sensitive subdivision of 17 much-needed homes. After 3 arduous years in 2019, we were granted preliminary plat approval, and not once did anyone mention that there was a plan afoot to put an E-zone over almost our entire property, now changed to 80-something%. 17 different developers have said they would have invested in our property if it were anywhere but Portland. Last year, BDS audit explains that, and due to a connective road required by PBOT, development will simply not pencil out with the proposed E-zone if our current entitlements expire. We are asking you to help us, to keep it open a path forward for development that is actually greater for health and safety of our neighborhood. We ask you not to impose the E-zone correction project here, and equally importantly, to consider the exigencies of COVID and current development entitlements we would like to have extended for 6 more years. We dedicated our lives to the community, counted on this for our retirement, and the city has much to gain from this development. Thank you.
Please keep the video on because I'm going to continue. There is a stub of a street called Southwest 26th that incongruously leads into the south end of our property. It has a steep 22% grade. It doesn't lead anywhere but to a clump of trees. A casual conversation with Adam Lyons, Commissioner Mingus Maps representative to a BDS, caught the full implications of this stub. In asking Adam about it, I mentioned that PBOT's Fabio De Freitas had insisted that a street connecting to the other side of our property was necessary for connectivity between neighborhoods, for fire and emergency access. I also said that we needed more time to find a developer that would take on our project. Adam asked, how long? I said, until the city's relationship with developers heals. He wrote us this letter. I quote with his permission. Dear Lori and Gary, our office is open to an extension of your exemption regarding the E-zone. Our rationale is twofold. First, it is a large property in a dense neighborhood near schools and amenities. The surrounding neighborhood is relatively dense and is developed consistent to what you intend for your property. The city needs more housing. Second, it is extremely clear that the city of Portland predicted to the point of encouraged development, given the cul-de-sac at Southwest 25th, end of quote. Adam explained this incongruous stub. It was the intention all along of the city to develop our property. Has that changed? Like with Adam, we need to talk with mutual respect and a desire to truly understand what is the best and highest use of our property that addresses the city's core values. Thank you.
Next up, we have Joe Hertzberg, Zevi Atkins, and Hans Stuck.
Hi, I simply want to speak in support of Rabbi Gary and Rabbi Lori. They are two people who've worked very hard and played by the rules and could end up as unintended casualties of this process. Their instruction and modeling of Jewish home life have had a profound influence on my family and many others. They've enriched our lives. And really, to the point at hand today, their home and large wooded property were essential elements of their ministry. My youngest daughter told me recently that what she recalls most about Gesher is playing in the woods and singing with other kids, far different from my memories of the religious institutions of my own youth. But I always knew that the property was also Gary and Lori's nest egg for the future, the linchpin of their retirement planning. As they mentioned, several years ago, they embarked on the daunting task of working with all of the city bureaus that had a role in the future of their property. 3 years ago, they came to an agreement with all of the Bureau representatives, the culmination of years of hard work by city staff, as well as Gary and Lori. It was a genuine win-win. The E-zone process threatens to undo this good work if one template is blindly applied without consideration of the unique circumstances of individual properties and property owners. Earlier, Planning and Sustainability Commissioner Gabe Shuships talked about correcting decades of mistakes. Please don't also let this undermine years of good work by city staff and residents by making one size fit all. Thank you.
Next up, we have ZV Atkins. ZV, you're muted.
Hello, I'm ZV Atkins. I don't know why my photo is not coming up. Can you hear me? Great. I'm here to support Rabbi Gary and Rabbi Lori in their request for an exemption from the E-zone map correction project on their property and a concurrent extension of time regarding the preliminary plat approval for the development of their Southwest Portland property. Their retirement nest egg is in the approved development project, which will provide great value to the city through more housing, improved community safety, stormwater management, and much more. The rabbi's important contribution to the Portland community for 32 years and counting impacts the current situation that they face. I have been personally beautifully impacted by the work the rabbis do. They have helped me face the spiritual challenges of illness and multiple deaths in my family and much, much more. I'm a CPA and a social worker, a longtime resident of Portland, and I'm a member of the board of directors of Gesher, the organization Gary and Lori built, which makes a profound impact on the community building in Portland. I have seen the generosity of spirit, time, as well as tremendous financial generosity with which Rabbis Gary and Rabbi Lori have opened their home for Shabbat dinners, holidays, etc., to thousands of different individuals like me. They model and inspire devotion to community building and to community service. Many of us have been impacted and inspired by the rabbi's work. We now invite friends, neighbors, and others to Shabbat dinners at our homes, continuing to build a community that is diverse, warm, and welcoming. The ripple effect of Gary and Lori's impact is enormous, but their financial compensation has been minimal. For many of the 32 years, they worked with without monetary compensation. The approved development project, which will provide great value to the city through more housing, improved community safety, stormwater management, improvement of the properties.
Next up, we have Hans Stuck.
Hello, Mayor Wheeler, council members, city staff, and other participants in this meeting. My name is Hans Stoik. I live in Southwest Portland in the Arnold Creek neighborhood. Over the past years, I've followed the E-zone correction project and found no reason personally to quarrel with it. But recently, I became aware of a consequence to this project that I had not considered before. Some property owners seeking to develop their land may be shut out of doing so, even after they have secured a permit from the city granting permission for development. There are likely many examples of owners being forced to give up development by the E-zone corrections. The one specific example I know of is that which Laurie and Gary spoke about a few minutes ago, and the past two speakers also. To those, I'd like to add my voice to encourage the city to seek ways to allow continued efforts to build on their land, such as their current approved permit allows, even after it expires. Please find a way to extend the permit beyond its current sunset. In the many decades I have known the owners, they have always been welcoming to their neighbors. They have been careful stewards of their land, and the permit reflects this. Thank you.
Next up, we have Matthew Forsyth, Jeff Batchelor, and Lucy Batchelor.
Hi, this is Matt Forsyth. As you know, I'm a neighbor immediately adjacent to Rabbi Gary and Rabbi Lori. I would like to lend support to their project, and second, that we not restrict the use of their land and allow development. There are some other factors which you should know, that we have had a problem with runoff from Southwest 25th. There's no way to manage the stormwater coming from that street. And that runs down between my property and Gary's and has flooded my property on occasion. And in approximately 1992, we had 4 trees come down on one of my neighbor's house, which I think is related to that. And I'm concerned about a tree immediately behind my house also. Their project would put in swales and retention containers and help prevent the flooding that is going on now, and potentially prevent further tree falls on my property. That being said, I think Gary and Lori have been excellent stewards of their property. They put together a very thoughtful plan working with the city. And I would third like people to accept the work that has gone forward previously and allow them to develop their land. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Jeff Batchelor. Jeff, you're muted.
All right. How are we doing now?
We hear you.
Good, thank you. I'm Jeff Batchelor. My wife Lucy is with me, and we are here to support the rabbis for really all of the reasons that have been stated thus far. We're both retired. Lucy was a flight attendant. I was a lawyer. We've been neighbors. Our property abuts the property we're talking about right now. We've been in the neighborhood for 25 years. And for all of those 25 years, we have fought the water runoff that comes from the rabbi's property down to ours. And I think most important for perhaps the city's purposes, it continues down the hill into the street where there is not sufficient, there aren't sufficient means to take care of the runoff. So not only has the runoff damaged our property, I can't tell you how many $1,000s we've spent remediating, but it's now ruining the street. And I believe it's going to soon cause problems even further down the hill. I'm told, however, that the rabbi's project will take care of this problem, that the water will be handled in a way that it's not been handled thus far. We're not engineers. We don't know the details. So you could all probably cross-examine us pretty effectively. But the point I'd like to make, in addition to those that have been made so far, is that the city is really facing liability. I don't mean liability in any sort of challenging sense or anything like that. I'm just saying that there's a problem developing that the project will take care of. And the city, I believe, therefore will not be required to take care of. So we're very much in support of the rabbis and the relief they request.
I'm not speaking.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, that's all of my time. And I don't think Lucy has anything to add at this point. You probably can't hear me, but.
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you, Jeff, for your testimony. Colleagues, we have about a dozen people left. Why don't we take a brief break here? Why don't we take about a 6 or 7 minute break here? It's about 3:40. Let's come back at 3:45. That'll give us all a few minutes to grab a drink or get up and stretch.
And Mayor, you don't add well. How about we come back at 10 after? You said, let's take a 6-7 minute break, and then you gave us 5. So how about
Yeah,
10?
okay, so it's, according to my clock, it's 3:39, almost 3:40. Let's come back at 3:50. Does that work for everybody?
Perfect. Thank you.
Great, we'll take a 10-minute recess. Thank you.
Okay, so next up we have Steve Liebervall, Carol Stamfer, and Marissa Ebner. No, I'm sorry, Rachel Harris. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me? Good. Okay. Thank you for allowing me to talk. To have a home is very important. My name is Steve Lebwall. I've been a resident in Portland since 1974. I've been a homeowner in Portland since 1977. We have 4 kids, and my new wife, we're both widow and widower, have 13 grandchildren. I have a home in Irvington, one in Multnomah Village, an office on Columbia Boulevard. I consider myself very fortunate. Our business is building playgrounds. We have 150 play areas in Portland, including the Rose Garden Children's Park, which many of you have played on. Our house was part of the heart of the family, where we had foster children, we had children, friends, parents who all live with us for different reasons. Over 44 years, the 2 houses are a major part of my and my wife Carol's retirement. Rabbi Lori and Rabbi Gary are my friends. Their land helped many people grow personally and spiritually. They are depending on their land, when developed according to the existing entitlements, to be a major part of their retirement. I've walked that land many times. The things they are saying are true as far as being a benefit to the city. I understand if they build a road connecting to 2 parts of the neighborhood and locate it 16 houses on it, it will have the following benefits to the new homeowners in the city, including homes for multi-generation families up to 76 people. That's a lot when we're trying to increase density all over the city. In the neighborhood where I have my office, they're building behind houses. They're allowing 2 ADUs, I believe. We're building like crazy over here, trying to fit houses in every square inch. Taxes paid to the city of approximately $150,000 per year will be raised from that property if the 16 or 17 houses are developed. The development will build a road that will provide access to 2 parks and 2 schools, as well as increase the emergency access and easier access for public transportation. Our house in Multnomah Village on 34th Street has giant potholes. You have to crawl down at about 5 miles per hour because the city can't afford to fix the street.
Next up, we have Carol Stamfer.
Hi, I think Steve was just going to say about the potholes on our street. We think that the road that Lori and Gary are being asked to build will be wonderful. It'll give stormwater runoff protection for their neighbors. The road will also allow public transportation if it was available, which there's no public transportation on Arnold or Lancaster right now, but public transportation could come through that neighborhood, and so could people walk. They could walk from one of 3 little neighborhoods. It's in the neatest of the little neighborhood associations there. Well, that road would allow people to access the playgrounds and the parks that are actually already in existence. It's sort of funny. My great granddaddy was in Heppner and was flooded out, and he died, and my family moved into the city. Well, what do you come to the city for? You come to the city because you have sewers. Well, this is going to help sewers. You have parks. Well, this is going to help access to parks. You have safety. If there's a road, then people can get to, if there's a fire for global warming, we'll get the fire engines in there and they'll put out the fire. Or if there's an emergency, we'll be able to get an ambulance in there. Right now, it's dead end and dead end from 2 different directions. This was always intended to be developed property. The other thing that happens is people will socialize. This is a connecting place. Lori and Gary are connecting people. The many, many, many trees that you as the city have advised them to plant, they will be sustainable trees. This will be a pleasant neighborhood that will bring maybe my children back to Portland rather than living in Seattle and Austin, because they don't want to be in Portland now. So I'm going to tell you, let them do this. This is going to be for the good of us all. We are just sustainers. We're just caretakers for a little bit of time of land that has belonged to the indigenous peoples for generations. Just let us take care of it for a little while now. Bye.
Next up, we have Rachel Harris.
Actually, I think next in line is my husband, Bob McCoy.
That's true. Hello, my name is Bob McCoy. I recently retired from the Department of Environmental Quality Northwest Region after 30 plus years working for the state. I understand that the goal of the map correctional project is to correctly map natural resources so that the city of Portland can make informed and rational zoning decisions. The basic criteria for an E-zone, which is the tree canopy that is contiguous with the seasonal stream that's on their property, obscures numerous conditions on Rabbis Laurie and Gary's property that are seriously inconsistent with providing ecological benefit. First, you have already heard about trees whose roots were waterlogged from the stormwater on Southwest 25th Avenue, which fell on the neighborhood properties, damaging homes and cars, though thankfully no people so far. Second, the roots of other trees are also waterlogged, and those trees are likely to fall as well. Third, flooding underneath that canopy cover is causing erosion and property damage. Fourth, the canopy cover hides 18 100+ foot tall Douglas firs that were blown down in a huge windstorm. Strange weather is no longer strange. We are living with increased global warming, and we need to become more resilient to the unexpected. Fallen trees in a wilderness might be considered of ecological benefit, but because they lie close to the homes of Inverness Court and Arnold Woods, these fallen trees are fire hazards. Although there is a continuous tree canopy cover, none of these conditions creates ecological benefit, just the opposite. Does our city not pride itself on having a mind of its own? I ask you to keep in mind that the already approved development for the Rabbis property creates an environmental tract that protects a stream, will have 150 trees saved, and will plant 50 more trees where they will be protected, not flooded. I ask you to be clear thinking and to consider what is truly the highest benefit to our city for the Rabbis property. Consistency with the nation might not bring our city its greatest benefit. Please reconsider imposing the E-zone map correction project as a consistent criteria across every property in our city. The currently approved development without the E-zone project will add much greater benefit. Thank you.
Next up, we have Rachel Harris.
Hi, my name is Rachel Harris, and I'm a retired employee from the Department of Community Justice, Multnomah County. Hello, Mayor Wheeler and others. But with that Department of Community Justice, justice is the operative word there on so many levels. I'm testifying in strong support of Rabbi Gary and Rabbi Laurie as their property owners. And you've heard over and over people saying how much that they've done for them. And I'm saying that Gesher and the rabbis have been an integral part of our personal and wider neighborhood and extended community for over 30 years. When we first visited their home and property, we were in awe and felt grateful that this amazing piece of property and personal space was being saved from developers, even though we knew that it was going to eventually become that developed. So through the tremendous amount of their own personal resources, they created an amazing community welcoming thousands of people near and far. I have personally seen and been impacted, but I've seen the life-changing impact they've had on so many people on so many levels. Throughout the years, the rabbis have made an immense investment of their own time and money, continually foregoing their own immediate needs, since they figured their life savings and their family's future would be part of this settlement when they eventually, I'm getting nervous here. Okay, push for infilling is absolutely needed, but it doesn't have to mean big projects. I think that homes that provide a great space in a wonderful neighborhood is perfect.
Next up, we have Marissa Ebner, Kevin Ebner, and Donald Bowerman.
Thank you for having me. My name is Marissa Ebner, and I'm a homeowner in the affected area of the proposed new E-zone overlays. With the new proposed C-zone overlay, my property would be somewhere between 80 and 90% covered by this overlay, including existing buildings, decks, patios, and yard space. The new overlay would create undue hardship to me as a property owner and make simple maintenance a huge financial burden. It also would have excluded my ability to replace our hazardous and uninsurable parking deck structure that was falling towards our house that my husband will speak into shortly. Our lot also contains a lot of trees, exactly 13, which we love. That said, they required maintenance to keep our house and family safe. We have 2 large maples that canopy over our house, and we greatly appreciate those, especially for the summer hot sun in the summer months to create shelter. But recently, due to lack of rain from ongoing drought, in the last year, we lost 5 cedars. These cedars sit approximately 10 to 15 feet from our house and are posing a fire hazard with extremely dry summers. We need to have these removed. In doing so, with the new ordinance, we would essentially have to pay the city a cost of $9,000 in permit fees, which doesn't include the removal cost, which is already in the tens of thousands of dollars. This creates undue financial burden on us as homeowners in a situation that is required to be fixed to keep our family safe. If something were to happen to the health of those very large maples I spoke about, they are over the size of the 20 inches in diameter. So not only would it cost us the original $1,900 permit fee plus $450 per extra inch of each of those trees. And as our neighbor Tessa stated, we have to maintain the trees for our safety and to help prevent the multiple number of times we lose power up here. My friend and neighbor on Southwest Hewitt was surprised by the 6 times that we were without power in her first year living up here in the trees. My lawyers tell me that the costs are unreasonable and therefore not legal for the city to impose this on us, and the new maps would probably have made it impossible to fix our hazardous structure and add onto our house or build an accessory dwelling unit. So this would substantially reduce our property value. Thank you for your time, and then I will hand it over to my husband.
Hi, I'm Kevin. I'm an architect and a homeowner impacted by the proposed zoning change. As a professional who recently went through the permitting process to get an addition approved for this property, I'm very concerned that this new blanket overlay will cause undue hardships, especially financial, to anyone facing the zoning change. There's already an existing environmental P-zone running through our backyard and that of our neighbors and into the forest beyond. Our house had an old derelict carport uphill at the street, which my wife mentioned, with hardscape exterior steps, a patio, and a bridge deck leading down to our front door. The carport was falling down, and it was explicitly not covered by our homeowner's insurance. It wasn't safe to walk on, let alone park a car. Getting permits to replace it was hard and expensive. It took over 18 months and several thousands of dollars for each of 2 land use reviews that we had to go through to be allowed to rebuild a garage addition in basically the same footprint as the original carport and entry. And that's without the new proposed E-zones. This also does not include the tens of thousands of dollars for the actual building and sewer permits. It's, as I mentioned, it's hard and expensive to get permits in the city of Portland. With the new overlay, I'm not sure we would have been able to replace our old unsafe structure with anything at all. As an owner, occupant, and architect, I tried to be as minimally invasive to the land, the hillside, and the surrounding trees as possible with the design, the construction, and the placement of the addition. But I'm not sure any of that would matter going forward with the new zoning. It seems like the only thing that would matter is really deep pockets. I'd like to say 2 more things. Professionally, as an architect, I think the best thing we can be doing is encouraging more urban growth and building houses in areas, even in tree canopy areas. More sensitive construction, new construction close to the city is better than anything far away from the city. And secondly, I'd like to say on behalf of our whole neighborhood, we love trees. We do not want to cut them down. Most of us live up here because we like the forest, but we do need to be able to maintain them in a way that is not a huge financial burden. Thank you.
Next up, we have Donald Bowerman. Donald, you're muted. It looks like you're on the phone. If you hit *6, you should be able to unmute. Oh, looks like you're on
Hello,
mute.
This is Donald Bowerman. I'm an attorney for the William and Margaret Batar property owners at 15580 Northeast Siskiyou Court, Portland. Oregon. I am an attorney of over 60 years in Clackamas County, and I represent the Batars who have lived on their property for approximately 32 years. They live on the Siskiyou property and have about a half acre of undeveloped property that's adjacent to their property. That property is near a drainage ditch at the rear of the property that has been there during their entire occupancy over 30 years, and it's about 12 to 15 inches in width, and it has never flooded. It's just a tiny ditch that a child could step over. That property is now subject to the new proposed environmental zone that goes 30 feet from the top of bank, and that will impact the lot, the vacant lot that is buildable otherwise. About 50% of it would be subject to the zone. It's never flooded. It's not a wetland, and there's no good reason to have this environmental zone on that property. It should be exempted. And of course, once the zone is in PAC, the rules of the environmental protection proposal is that development will be approved in the environmental protection zone only in rare and unusual circumstances. So it's very unlikely that that property can be.
Next up, we have Ted Labby, Leslie Owens, and Teos Abadia.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler, Council. My name is Ted Labby. I'm here this afternoon to speak in favor of the E-Zone map correction project and encourage you to move ahead quickly with its adoption. I want to praise the work of your staff for the last 3 years to do some really intensive work, reaching out to over 600 different property owners. Truly impressive amount of work with really high quality data that has gone into this update. I think that, E-zones are a crucial part of the city's climate adaptation, climate mitigation strategy, and that we cannot delay further on this update. We need to adopt it today and move forward with work on the floodplain and the North Reach and the tree conservation programs. The more that we delay, the longer it takes for us to get to those areas where we have high need populations that are at risk from climate change. So please move forward today with adoption so we can get to those other really important conservation, natural resource conservation and climate adaptation needs in our city. Your staff has done a fantastic job, and please, in haste, move forward. Thank you.
Next up, we have Leslie Owens.
Thank you. In addition to being a homeowner impacted by these changes, my husband and I own a 35-acre vineyard in Newburgh. The property is live certified, salmon safe, and organic. I'm required to maintain ecologically rich areas on my property, which includes meadows, trees, waterways, and soils. It is an international recognized organization and is a full-time commitment by my husband and I. I tell you this as it is a representation of how we view not only our property in Newburgh, but also our property in Portland. Our family has been in Oregon for 8 generations. My father-in-law spent his entire career working for the city of Portland, ultimately running the Portland Bureau of Parks and Recreation. We're committed to the city and believe strongly in protecting the parks, waterways, and natural beauty in Oregon. We purchased our home on 2.2 acres in Southwest Portland for its natural surroundings and landscape flower beds. We already have an existing overlay on our property, and here are our concerns about why we disagree with increasing those overlays. Number one, we never received any notification, been notified of any neighborhood meetings, HOA meetings, et cetera, regarding these proposed changes. The only reference we received was from another neighbor. This is unacceptable, and we believe the city does not have the right to make changes to our property that decreases the value of our property arbitrarily. These new changes would increase the overlay to about 50% of our property, including driveways, parts of our house, et cetera, and creates undue and unreasonable expensive costs and fees. Number two, we already strictly abide by the existing overlay requirements and realize the importance in keeping streams, trees, et cetera, as natural as possible. These are already protections put in place when it comes to the existing environmental overlay zones. Extreme weather protection is important to us. We agree there is value in keeping things natural, but there is value in cleaning out invasive species, ivy, and dead wood. On summer days, we fear for fires. On cold days and windy days, we fear for weakened trees.
Next up, we have Teos Abadia.
Hi, my name is Teos Abadia. I have a master in environmental management, and I want to talk to you about a special opportunity for the city. My wife and I have submitted written testimony with map examples, and we submitted an important letter to the council from the Columbia Land Trust. We're testifying not just for our small property, but for the much larger area that's behind our home and up the slope of Cornell Mountain. We and other neighbors are asking for the current proposed zoning of C for Cornell Mountain to be instead increased to a P. This would join two existing P zones to the north and south of this area. There are several reasons, and all are consistent with city policy. Number one, it's unique. This area, Cornell Mountain, is the highest in all of Portland, with steep slopes vulnerable to wind and rain. Protecting this unique area is in line with the protection granted to places like Powell and Rocky Butte, recognized as unique areas with steep slopes. Climate change. Climate change is impacting which trees can grow in Portland, such as hemlock and grand fir. Preserving this slope will ensure that Portland's natural history is preserved, and that is also in keeping with past city policy. Watershed and wetlands. The top of Cornell Mountain is a flat area with a wetland much of the year. We're working with the landowner to conduct a study. All of the recognized streams in this area radiate from Cornell Mountain. Number four, wildlife protection. This is a special habitat area, a Title 13 high value HCA. It's consistent with city policy and directives to protect this land. It acts as a narrow corridor for this critical wildlife of bobcat, elk, bald eagles, deer, coyote, and much more. For all these reasons, and recognizing the testimony of the Columbia Land Trust, we call on the city to protect this with a P-zone designation. Staff drew up a proposed correction that includes it at the request of the previous commission. We'd like you to look at that and enact it. If that is not possible, at a minimum, we request that you look at a wide corridor of P-zone in this area to tie together these zones and preserve the unique habitat. Thank you.
Next up, we have Chris Gedros, Jordan Schnitzer, and Sarah Taylor.
Hi, this is Chris Gedros. I'm not with Jordan Schnitzer or the other folks. Should I go ahead?
Yes, go ahead, Chris.
Okay. So my situation is I have a single lot in the Southwest Hills that's affected by this overlay zone. And there's, honestly, I'm not sure where to even start. My lot is surrounded by development, and I'm not sure how much of you have seen the other testimony, but as you can see, my lot has houses, developed houses on four sides, and is joined to, it's at the very edge of the overlay.
So Chris, it looks like you froze.
Zone is growing as we speak. There's several issues with the way the overlay zone is written that's not being addressed here. I know that your staff is told that they're supposed to be mapping the overlay zone, that's it. In my case, the only criteria for the overlay zone is the tree canopy. And that's the, I mean, I don't have a wetland, I don't have a, you know, some kind of a special environmental zone. It's a tree canopy that connects me with the rest of the environmental zone. And in my case, I'm at the very edge, which means that I have a transition area, which actually, when you apply the code, it is more restrictive than if I had in the middle of the protection zone. So I think there's some issues here that I know that your staff has looked at, but has not been addressed. So at this point, I have a lot that really is my retirement that I'd like to develop. It's for any other criteria is perfect for development. It's close to downtown. It's got all of the infrastructure there. It's something that the city should like to develop, but it's putting these restrictions on it it's just not viable.
Next up, we have Jordan Schnitzer.
Mr. Mayor, City Council members, thank you. I'll make my points quickly because you've heard so much. I have 3 houses in this affected area on Southwest Hessler, Southwest Patton, and Southwest Humphrey. And I commend the city staff for doing a good job, but I never got any notice of any neighborhood meetings. We were never called or approached by any of the city people on our properties. I did hire Craig Keast, met with staff. They met with him on the property in Hessler, for instance, where the protected zones went through garages and driveways and houses. They made those corrections. So a couple of quick bullet points, and that is this. I don't see a rush right now that there's an impending crisis that this has to be solved today and tomorrow. What should happen here as proper, wonderful public servants, that they take the time to meet with all the neighbors. There should have been a form that was signed off by the neighbor and the staff where they met. Because my gut sense is a lot of the complaints that you heard today, and you could have another 100 people testifying, could be solved because the staff was responsive. And therefore, if there are issues that can't be mutually resolved, then you'll deal with that by exception. I think a lot of these issues could be resolved if the staff then took the time to make sure they met with every single affected neighbor. So the neighbor felt that the city was listening to them and the idiosyncrasies of their properties. Next, the staff did use that word stream over and over and over. My property is contiguous to the Torches. That is not a stream. It's not even a creek. It's not even a dribble. So I think let's not try to inflame the situation. It would have been neat if we had images of what was, because there are certainly Fannel Creek and others that are real creeks and streams. But so many, in my opinion, when looking at the maps of what they're calling streams are not. The last point that was already said is, they talked about the tree canopy, and I forget the neighbor that mentioned this, but the more trees you put up and create a canopy, the more protected zones you have. That is, as he said, a disincentive to planting trees on your property. So quickly, what I'd say is slow it down, extend it 6 months or a year, have the staff meet with all the neighbors they haven't met with, and I think we can reach mutual agreement with most of us. Thank you.
Next up, we have Sarah Taylor.
Okay, hi. I'm probably one of the few people that are coming from the E-zones in the Northwest along Highway 30, the watersheds that impact St. John's and Lytton. And I'd like to just tell everybody that long time ago, the city took the houses in Lytton and in many parts of North Portland and zoned them all heavy industrial. So just take a minute to think that all of your fossil fuels, 90% of Oregon is sitting along that river. And every single one of those people lost the value of their homes so that you could have gas and oil and not have to have the CI hub or any industry in your neighborhood. So it is really hard to hear that people are upset that they cannot develop their land. When I see what happened to the people in the CI hub next to Forest Park, when you're on Highway 30, water pours off the mountain and into the industrial area, creating super funds. Our trees also fall. You can't even drive hardly near St. John's today because rocks fell off the hillside and block the street. We have huge traffic jams. We also lose electricity. It's like Multnomah Falls over there. The water pours down. It collects contaminants from industry that goes into the river. So I completely support the E-zones, and I don't see how we can have a CI hub with creeks pouring down into it, making this soil even more unstable than it already is. So I just want you to know that you're asking other people to take the burden for you who cannot develop their property because we've taken the burden of industry on our shoulders. And
next up, we have Nicholas Overall, Kim Malik, and Karen J. Raffnell.
Hello, my name is Nick Overall. I'm a landscape architect here in the city of Portland. And I just wanted to reiterate something that was stated by the speaker number 10, Jamie Housley. I do work with some rural properties and some properties with a lot of forests. And I do agree with many of his points that the rigorous mapping is really important for to have a very clear process and decision-making for the permit process and any developments or improvements that will be proposed by homeowners, and that it will make for a much clearer system. The examples of the overlay zone map corrections that I'd seen seemed like it was, first of all, that it was a very nebulous sort of edge condition, and it's going to cause a lot of confusion and delays and possibly increased costs. And everybody just needs a more defined system to make decisions on their properties. Thank you.
Next up, we have Kim Malik.
Hi. Thanks for allowing me to speak today. I'm Kim Malik, and I reside with my partner, Dr. Mike Axley, at 4855 Southwest Hewitt. We and many of our neighbors have unfortunately not experienced the outreach and involvement noted earlier in the meeting. Most of this work has been going on during the global pandemic, when people have been focused on keeping safe, worrying about schools being open, and focused on other things than E-zones. My partner, Mike, is a doctor and has been working tirelessly on the front lines of the pandemic. As an example. So this matter has only come to light very recently to us and most of our neighbors. And I think that's evidenced by the number of people coming out today to make these statements. You know, we just want to have a chance to work with the city to make reasonable decisions that protect the environment and have accurate mapping. Mike and I have worked our entire lives to save for and purchase this property. We adopted 3 children and are working to build a life for our family here. Currently, the southeast edge of our property is in a conservation zone, but now the new map would convert that area to a protection zone, and most of the rest of the property, including our driveway entrance and our sizable blackberry bush, would become a conservation zone. So you're welcome to come out and enjoy a snack and see for yourself. The mapped area just doesn't make sense. With these new E-zones, instead of being able to develop 4 more lots, we might be able to get 1 more, but I'm told that the city fees and consultant fees that would be required would entirely consume the value of our lot, making it nearly impossible. We can't even build a play area we have planned for our children. This is a major down zone for our property and a large financial loss to our family and a loss to housing for future families. The city needs to stop talking about housing and actually make decisions that allow housing to be developed at a reasonable cost. The cost of developing in or near these zones in both time and money is cost prohibitive. We do not have the tens of thousands of dollars required for consulting and city fees just to see if another lot might be available.
Next up, we have Karen J. Raffnell.
Unmuting. I'm Karen Raffnell. I'll be speaking about our own situation. We've lived more than 20 years in our rural neighborhood of small farm properties in unincorporated Multnomah County. This area has been zoned RF, that is residential farm for 20 years or more. So development is restricted to just one home per 2 acres. Our home has been a farm on relatively flat terrain for more than 70 years. We have a single 1940 vintage house and barn on a northern tax lot of 1 acre and a barn on a southern tax lot of 2 acres. The southern lot has a long flag road for street access. That road's been there more than 100 years, and it's a vacated county road. There's never been an overlay of the environment on our property. A wetland P zone, however, has recently been proposed over our property. It's located in the busy heart of our land and covers more than 24,000 square feet, nearly 20% of our property. It covers a large section of our flag road, more than 225 feet of the frontage of our southern pasture lot. It covers the private drainage easement that was established with our prior Type 3 land use review. The P zone also covers an emergency vehicle turnaround easement next to the flag road that must be developed if the home is ever placed on a southern lot. The P zone even covers half of our barn. We strenuously oppose the imposition of this P zone on our property because it is, one, unnecessary due to at least 5 redundant protections for the proposed P zone area that are already in place. For example, it overlays the private drainage easement. It's also, the proposal has inaccuracies. The proposal is premature. All Portland Development Service offices have been closed to us for 2+ years, preventing resolution of between existing easements and proposed P zones.
Mayor, that completes testimony.
All right, thank you everybody who testified. And again, I apologize that we had to cut a number of people off after 2 minutes, but with so many people signed up to testify and so much interest in this, we do have to keep it moving along. But as I'm sure you understand, 2 minutes does at least give us a sense of the specifics of the issues that people are interested in having us follow up on. And I want to reiterate that we're not making any decisions today, that we will continue this discussion and we will keep the record open and we'll discuss all of that later. But today was just our opportunity to hear what the community is thinking and to ask any initial questions we have of staff. And so with that, colleagues, I will ask if there is anybody who has any specific issues at this time that they'd like to ask about. I do too, but I'll let my colleagues go first. Commissioner Hardesty, it looks like you got your hand up first, followed by Commissioner Mapps.
Thank you. And I want to thank everybody who took the time to come and provide their testimony today. I heard a couple of things that I want to ask staff questions about. And I certainly, staff presents this as we are now actually have identified what areas we should put into the protection zone. So we're not changing policy with the vote when it comes. What we're doing is saying, based on the policy that we passed, this is the area that's been identified. Do I have an accurate assessment of what we as council are being asked to consider? Eric?
Thank you, Commissioner. And I guess the way this will work is as we try to respond to questions, some of them I will address, and Daniel has more of the details in terms of the mechanics of the program. And many of the site-specific testimony you heard, of course, will require some follow-up research on our part. So we will probably, get back to you on some of that. But in general, the city has an adopted natural resources inventory, which identifies to us where we believe resources are. And then this project is attempting to apply previous policy to that information and update our regulatory maps. And I think the nuance there is, of course, as we do that, we talk to people and we refine information, and we are allowed to make decisions that apply what we've learned to that. And Daniel, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
And let me just say it also probably, and Daniel, maybe you were going to say this, part of this is also our climate action goals, is making sure that we are using every opportunity to get our climate action goals realized. Daniel, with that?
Yeah, I think that that's a fair characterization, that natural resources help to make us resilient to the effects of climate change. So protecting resources is definitely in line with Portland's climate action goals. And yeah, I think Eric hit the nail on the head that we have a adopted natural resource inventory, which is a systematic methodology for determining where natural resources are located, all verifiable through site visits. And if we confirm that a resource is located in a specific location, we apply a systematic and consistent methodology to how E-zones should be applied to those resources. And the methodology we have taken pains to make consistent with existing adopted policy. So if protection zones were applied to streams previously in a specific area of the city, we are applying protection zones to streams in the future. That goes for wetlands and forest canopy as well. We're trying to remap these zones using clear and consistent rules that are consistent with existing policy.
And thank you for that, Daniel. And I will say that certainly the last couple of years have shown us that extreme weather conditions and wildfires are not anomalies anymore. They're just going to be a part of our day-to-day life. And so I understand this feels a lot like the conversation we had around the residential infill project. And the fear that people had about how development would happen and where it would happen and who would be impacted by it. I appreciate those answers to my question. And I just want to reiterate that this conversation is not about policy. It's about where the policy applies. And this particular time, we're doing this particular area, but we have several other areas that we also need to map out. Is that also accurate?
Yeah, that's correct. We hope to move on to the industrial areas along the Columbia Corridor and in Northwest St. Helens Road. I apologize, my headphones are dying here, so if I cut out, I'm sorry. But yes, we do intend to move on to do those industrial areas in conjunction with a upcoming economic opportunities analysis.
Well, I just want to thank you. I know that a lot of work went into this. I look forward to reviewing the written testimony that was submitted online, as well as listening to staff recommendations coming out of today's public hearing. So thank you.
Commissioner Mapps.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thanks to everyone who testified today. I think we learned a lot. I also want to congratulate staff for doing your great work on a clearly complicated project. Mostly, I'm interested in hearing more from staff about next steps. Can the public still submit testimony? What are some key dates coming up? How does this play out?
Commissioner, why don't I go ahead and get into that right now, so people know. And I may reiterate this later, but so oral testimony is going to be closed at the end of this session. The written record is going to remain open until 5 p.m. on Friday, February 18th. Additional written testimony may be submitted through the eZone Map app until that time. And as a reminder, the public can access the Map app at portlandmaps.com. And we are intending to continue the hearing on April 13th at 2 p.m. So that will be April 13th at 2 p.m. And at that hearing on April 13th, the council will reconvene to introduce any amendments or to take testimony on proposed amendments. Proposed amendments will then be posted on the eZone project website on April 6th. And again, that address is portland.gov/bps/ezones. And again, if you just go to portland.gov, you can find it. The written record will reopen for the submission of additional written testimony on April 6th when proposed amendments are posted on the project website. And testimony will be submitted through the eZone Map app or by emailing the council clerk at cctestimony@portlandoregon.gov. I did not expect people to remember that or to take notes. All of this will be available on the city council page, and I will reiterate all of that at the end of this hearing. Does that answer your question more fully than you wanted?
Great job, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you.
And can I add on one thing, that we are continuing to offer site visits. So if anybody has site specific concerns, and we heard the number of those raised in the testimony today, if any of those people would like to request a site visit to follow up with staff, some of that testimony was in regards to sites that we have already visited previously, but we are committed to going out a second time if people have continuing questions. But we are happy to continue doing site visits. We plan on wrapping that up on March 16th, assuming that we don't have a deluge of additional requests. But if we do see that there's a level of desire for additional site visits, we'll keep City Council informed and let you know if that March 16th deadline that we're proposing for the end of site visits is going to be feasible for us.
And I'll add one thing to just on top of that, amendments for the April discussion, I think, will come out of two channels. You will hear things or read things in the testimony, and then you are welcome to propose amendments, of course. And we'd love to hear the list of amendments from you by the end of March so that we can compile them and post them on the website. You also may get a list of suggested staff amendments from us based on the additional site visits we're doing and us going through the testimony.
Great. And Daniel, I just want to note that a number of people who testified today indicated they own significant properties in the area, but they haven't heard from the city. And so somewhere notifications got lost. If you could potentially reach out to some of those individuals through the council clerk, I think that would be a good move on your part. Commissioner Mapps.
Daniel, for folks who would like to set up a site visit, can you tell us how you do that? Is there an email address or phone number?
Yeah. So the project email address is ezone@portlandoregon.gov. That's EZONE@portlandoregon.gov. And we have a hotline. Actually, I'm going to share my screen really quick so we can put the stuff on the screen. Just a moment. Yeah, so EZONE@portlandoregon.gov. And our voicemail line is 503-823-4225. Either way is a great way to contact project staff, and any requests that we receive through either of those avenues, we will follow up with and schedule a site visit, and we'll work with property owners to make sure that we can find a time that if they would like to be present for that site visit, we can meet them on the site and talk with them personally.
Thank you, Dan.
All right, good. Any questions for right now?
Mayor, I'm going to just chime in really quick. I'm hearing from the council clerk that April 13th at 2 p.m. date is actually already booked by the council clerk, has some budgeting items. So if we can just take 1 minute, because we do want to announce the next date that'll be continued to, if Keelan can let us know a date after April 13th when there would be time to return, a time certain to return for a land use hearing.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. We actually have the next day, the 14th, Thursday at 2 p.m. available.
I think that would work. I see Daniel nodding, and yeah. So just for the record, council will return April 14th at 2 p.m. And the written record remains open until Friday, February 18th at 5 p.m. When council reconvenes, there'll be an opportunity for additional testimony, so the record will reopen. Daniel, can you let me know, are you planning on opening the project site written record before that hearing on the 14th? When can you announce when that will be reopened after it closes on the 18th?
Yes, thank you, Lauren. So we hope to post all of the proposed amendments on our website on April 6th, and that is also the date that we intend to reopen the written record. So the April 6th will be the day the written record reopens.
And all of this detailed information about records opening and closing and dates will also be posted on the project website. So for those not tracking, myself included, we'll have it in writing on the website. Okay.
Okay, good. So I had a couple of just brief questions. First of all, there was a number of people who testified today that they felt that the maps that are available on the city website are inaccurate. What do we do about that? That was not a rhetorical question. Yeah, sorry.
The underlying data in the eZone Map app is very accurate. We have received some feedback from several people that the way it's presented is not user-friendly. We responded early on in the project to that feedback by posting some instructions that walk people through using the map in a step-by-step way, but we could potentially work with our GIS team and our bureau to see if there's a way that we can make that data more user-friendly than it currently is. It's I'm not sure specifically what aspects those people were speaking to. I think potentially one of the questions that we received was about lot lines. The person thought their lot lines were not represented accurately, or they couldn't see where their lot lines were in relation to features that they knew were in their neighborhood. That's one thing I remember hearing, and that's something that we could, that's actually, it may be fairly easy to fix that. So we could potentially add lot lines to the map. I don't know if there are other specific issues that were addressed there. I can go back and review the testimony that we've heard and see if there are other things, other specific.
Okay. I appreciate that. And then a couple of people testified on something that was interesting to me. They said that stormwater runoff will be directed to their properties. What is your reaction to that?
My understanding, and this is strictly from what I've been told by Rabbi Gary and Rabbi Laurie, is that there is an existing stub street that was built in that neighborhood in the 1990s. And the intention was that stub street was going to eventually become a through street that was going to run through the neighborhood. And for whatever reason, at that time, the city didn't mandate that adequate stormwater facilities be installed on that stub street. I think the assumption was that when that street was connected through the neighborhood, stormwater would be managed by the connecting street. But that neighborhood has not been subdivided, or the development has never been built. It's been 30 years since that stub street was built, and the adjoining development has not gone through. And so I think the assumption of the neighbors and of Rabbi Gary and Rabbi Laurie is that when they do this development, they will be required to build adequate stormwater facilities, which will manage the runoff that's coming off of that existing stub street. And so they feel that it's necessary that they complete this development in order to contain the existing stormwater, which the people in the neighborhood are saying are causing erosion issues on their properties.
And if there are erosion issues on their properties, that would certainly be of concern to me, as I'm sure it's a great concern to them. What are the mitigation efforts, or how do we counter that?
My understanding is that would be taken care of through improvements that would be required of the developers who would build that site. I believe that as part of the conditions of approval of that land use review, those are required elements that would have to be built as the neighborhood is developed. So I think the intention is that the developers would build those facilities to manage the stormwater.
In the short term, of course, if there's an issue of runoff coming off of a public facility that's presenting an immediate danger, I think the property owners can contact the city through either the Portland Transportation or Bureau of Environmental Services to get someone to look at that.
Okay. Very good. Any further questions, colleagues, for right now? Understanding this is far from over. All right, so let me read through this again. And please, Lauren, listen aggressively to make sure I've got this right. Keelan, listen aggressively to make sure I've got this right. So the written record will remain open. Right now, the oral record is closed. The written record will remain open until 5 p.m. on Friday, February 18th. Additional written testimony may be submitted through the eZone Map app. Until that time, you can access the map app at portlandmaps.com. The hearing will be continued on April 14th, 2022 at 2 p.m. At the April 14th hearing, the City Council will reconvene to introduce amendments and to take testimony on proposed amendments. The proposed amendments, if there are any, will be posted on the E-Zone project website on April 6th. The website for that is portland.gov/BPS/eZones. The written record will then reopen for the submission of additional written testimony on April 6th, when proposed amendments are posted on the project website. Testimony can be submitted through the eZone Map app or by emailing the council clerk at cctestimony@portlandoregon.gov. Does that all sound right? I'm seeing thumbs up, and that is good news. Commissioner Hardesty.
Mayor, I apologize. You did a fabulous job, but one other question came to mind for me,
Sure.
and I just wanted to know how we were going to respond. Several people testified that changing the zoning would affect like 80% of their property. And and people talked about driveways and garages and things of that sort. Is there a short explanation to help me understand why making this change would have such a significant impact on some individual property owners? If there's not, I'll wait till you do the written explanation. But if there's like a crib note response, I'd be grateful for it.
I don't know if I'm familiar with these specific sites, so I don't think I can speak to the details, but I can speak to the idea of a driveway being in the E-Zone. And I mentioned on that the example of the house in the E-Zone during my presentation that there are exemptions for all existing development, which would also apply to driveways, utilities, any outbuildings, anything that is permitted and legal when it goes in is fully exempt from the E-Zone. So if somebody has a driveway that that wasn't previously in the E-Zone and now it becomes in the E-Zone, there's no restrictions on their ability to continue to use and maintain that driveway as is currently built. And so that means if they need to regrade it, repave it, whatever, expansions or alterations to development that go beyond the existing footprint of that development would not necessarily have those same level of exemptions, but that exemption does apply to all existing development. And then in terms of a site having 80% coverage by an E-Zone, it kind of depends on the flavor of the E-Zone. So there's two different types. There's the protection zone, which is highly restrictive, and then there's a conservation zone, which is less restrictive. And so it's not unusual for a site to have extensive conservation zone coverage if it's a largely forested site. So if in fact the forest vegetation is mapped accurately on that site and it turns out that 80% of the site is covered by conservation zone, then it would not be inappropriate necessarily to cover a site with 80% conservation zone, because new development is allowed within the conservation zone within certain limits, and property owners that want to exceed those limits can do so through the environmental review process. So there's a clear and objective standard process for development in the conservation zone, and then there's a alternative discretionary process for additional development that can't meet those standards.
And as Daniel mentioned, the E-zones are often used to protect forests and buffers around streams. So it is pretty common for there to be existing development because we're in an urban area.
And I was going to say, and that's normally the pushback with major development because of just the slant of the hills and the unstability of some of the land itself when it comes to development on it. So not an easy conversation. I really appreciate the work and the answer to my questions. Thank you.
Yeah, my quick question is about.
Ryan.
Yeah, thanks. Septic tanks, with a couple people mentioned that, and I just did not really understand. The testimony seemed compelling, but I didn't really understand the nuance and the details of it. So it could be that my staff and I will dig into this with you, or is there a simple explanation that you can offer?
Quick explanation is that there is a portion of the city along Skyline that is actually outside the urban growth boundary and that is on septic. And that's just the history of Portland being in existence before the UGB. So in that area, the ability to put in new septic is important for their ability to do future development. And I think the request you heard was that the exemptions we have in the code right now are for replacement of existing, and didn't address the new possibility, which is an issue that affects a fairly small part of the city in Northwest Portland.
Yeah, a small part of the city, yet there was a reason why they wanted to show up and have their voices heard. Okay. I want to make sure I keep following up on that then. Thank you so much.
All right, good. I think that concludes everything. Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Recording stopped.